Des Illustrates. Today we are gonna take a look at how I approach painting butterflies. Right now we are seeing the colors that I planned out to use in this painting. The colors are cerulean blue, transparent yellow medium, lavender, sepia, Payne's grey, permanent red light and permanent red deep. I ended up also using interference blue, gold and yellow ochre, but I didn't show in the colors up front, and all the colors are from my Van Gogh palette. The first thing I did while painting this butterfly is painting in the red areas. The butterfly that we are painting is a peacock butterfly, and the most part of the wings, both the upper wings and the lower wings, are red. So this was the part that needed the biggest washes and was the most color that was in the wings. So I ended up doing that first in the upper wings, and in the lower wings there was red too, and it was somehow for the eye also the most active color, but it was blended in with all the browns and stuff. So here I first laid down some browns to be able to layer the red a bit over the edges of it and to blend it in more with each other. When laying down my first washes of red, I was thinking that it might be enough already with the first wash, and I even thought it was a bit too intense maybe when it was wet, and especially the right wing, I took some red away while it was still wet, but I ended up going over the wings another time with the red because it dried up much lighter. We all know watercolor does this, but I found the shift in the color pretty big for the reds. For the first layer of the spots on the wings, I used some Payne's grey and some cerulean blue. I ended up making the cerulean blue even darker in the end. This is not something that I showed in the video because I was messing with it off camera, but the interference blue that I ended up covering the cerulean blue with works better on darker areas. You really see the blue in that shiny paint when it's layered on something dark or you use it on dark paper. So I ended up changing those spots off camera, but I will talk about that later on when we will get to the part that I'm adding the interference color. For the right wing I did exactly the same. I layered first a layer of sepia that was a bit of a brownish color for the outside of the wing, and when that was more dry I will add the red parts. You can see that I don't let it dry completely, but just to the touch, so that the red and the brown will mix a tiny bit. Not too much, but just to make the transition between the two colors a bit better. Something that I find really important in painting literally anything, but especially in complicated patterns like this butterfly, is that you start light and that you give yourself room for a bit of error, and with that also can add a lot more detail, because if you start light, then the next layer you make sure you don't cover the entire layer you did before, and with that you can let all the layers shine through in the end, and it will look a lot more detailed and textured, and it will also, in my opinion, look nicer because the pattern comes more to the front instead of the watercolor textures. Sometimes watercolor textures are nice and I do use them. I did use them in the watercolor painting that I did of a mod that had a really nice yellow and purple transitions, and I layered some detail over that but not much. But if you have a butterfly like this, and we also will be adding hairs on the lower wings and a lot of hairs on this body that we are doing right now, it's just more closer to the picture and to the reality if you keep layering and keep using the texture that you get by layering and the transparent layers over each other than if you would let it be purely the watercolor textures that you get in blooms or wet in wet washes. Technically, layering is also a watercolor texture, but it's a really different approach. Layering the watercolors is also what makes, for me, painting the bodies of butterflies easier, because butterflies' bodies are, if you look at the anatomy of butterflies, are built into segments, and not always you can see this good if you have a picture or you see them in reality. Some have more hair, some are that dark that you can almost not see the transition from one segment into another, but they do have them, and by studying the basic anatomy a bit of the butterfly bodies and using that in your painting texture that you are applying in the different layers, even though you are not seeing it in the reference that you are using right now, makes it a lot easier to paint them. Right here I am adding the yellow to the butterfly. On this point I wished a bit that I did the yellow earlier, because the dark blue that I had applied, that was a Payne's Gray, to the bigger spots was lifting up a bit with the yellow, and that was making it a bit hard to get it a really striking clean yellow. So if I would do this painting again, then I would add the yellow first after I did the red, and then do the Payne's Gray or the black spots. I prefer using the Payne's Gray because it makes the color deeper than if you use straight black. You could also mix your own black and give it a bit more texture and a bit more depth too. You could even mix in some granulating colors to give it some extra texture too, and that will make the spots even more interesting. Here you already see me darkening the spots that I was talking about earlier for the interference blue, but I left the light blue parts lighter, and that is the part that I also darkened up later on, because the interference blue wasn't really showing itself as a blue, just as a sparkle on the light blue. And when I darkened it a bit, it did become a lot more bluish of a sparkle. The red here I gave another layer, like you just saw, and for this side of the wing I did the yellow after that, so I would get a nice transition with the red that I was missing a bit on the right side of the butterfly. And I also did that on the lower wing. There I used a bit of the yellow ochre that I was saying that I added later on, instead of straight up yellow. And by using more wet and wet techniques, I was getting more of a nicer transition, even though a lot of it got covered up later on with the textures, because watercolors are transparent. You will see this in the end result too. So that was something that I did different after I did the right wing first. I think while painting butterflies, especially if you have more textured ones with more hairs or with really complicated patterns, it becomes really a challenge of knowing which watercolor techniques to use and in what order you can best use them. So if you have trouble with this kind of butterflies, I do really recommend layering more and also to study the different watercolor techniques that there are, like with the wet and wet technique or drop color into wet areas, blending them out, and also layering to add textures, and also using granulating colors that can really come in quite handy in creating textures on animals like this with these complicated patterns, because sometimes patterns are really hard to paint and certain textures with hairs, and then granulating colors can really help you there. Another tip that I want to give in creating these more complicated patterns on butterflies, and also in painting butterflies in the first place, is to know in which order you are gonna paint them, because a lot of butterflies have a lot of striking colors that you don't want to bleed into each other, like the red and the blue areas here, and on top the yellow areas that I said that I wished I had done earlier on before the black. And if you have other butterflies like with bright green and black next to each other, or white and black next to each other, you gotta know in which order you have to paint up front, because if you just start without thinking, you're gonna end up with colors bleeding into other areas where you don't want them and that are not easily to fix or not fixable at all. And I see that a lot in the butterflies that we also did for the challenge from Alison Lyon. She chose a lot of beautiful butterflies with really striking colors, and a lot of them it was really important to know the order that you painted them in. I did make a few mistakes there on my own, where I had to remind myself again, like paint yellows first, paint light areas first, and leave black areas or paint gray areas at last. And also to paint big washes first, like in this case the reds, because you are wanting them to be a flat wash in this case, or sometimes you want some beautiful granulation in that wash, and you can't do that really easily, even though if it's a darker color, if there are already a lot of other textures and details or colors in the painting where you have to paint around, because you don't want them to bleed into that new color that you are putting down. So to have a slight idea what you are gonna do when you see a butterfly, and to really think about that when you start your painting, can help you a lot in the future, and it can make painting a lot easier. Here we are going again with the butterfly details on the body. You can see that now I came back to the body for a third or fourth time already, and after this I am still not done. The butterfly body is one of the focal points of your painting, and it is something that makes your butterfly more alive. So I tend to put a lot of details in the body to put it all together. And that means that you have to come back a lot because textural details need to be put over each other when the layer beyond that or below that is dry. If you would want to put new strokes with a different color and little details on a layer that's still wet, it's gonna bleed into each other and it's gonna be more of a wet in wet technique. And when layering little brush strokes over each other, we don't want to blend it together. We don't want to be it wet and wet. We want it to be brush strokes that add up to each other with layers. So you have to wait between the layers to be completely dry, otherwise this technique won't work. That's also why you see me jumping around on the painting a lot. It might be a bit confusing while you're painting or while you are watching this that we are jumping around this much on the painting, but this is the order that I painted this butterfly in, and I even left out some of the right side, I believe, because the video came too long. And this I do to create those textures because the layers beneath need to be dry, like I said. And this is also something that I would recommend when you are painting, to jump around a lot on your painting to make sure that you keep layering on dry layers. I do know this can be a bit discouraging while you are painting your butterfly or any other subject, because it makes your painting stuck longer in the stage that we all call the ugly stage. But that's something you gotta break through, and that you gotta get used to seeing that stage of your painting, and that knowing that you gonna put it together and that you know how to do it. I think personally that the ugly stage of painting is a really valuable stage of your painting, and that's the stage where you need to take the most time and to be patient with yourself and your painting, because that's the foundation for the textures and for the end results that you are making. And if you're gonna put in the end details and the little white spots and every details of the veins and everything, then you are not being able more to create all these textures that you had to create in the ugly stage because you rushed through it, and then that will be something that stays visible even in the end result of your painting. For me personally, this stage of the painting is one that I linger the longest in, because I know how important it is, and that I know that this is the easiest moment to put in all those little details that I wish to have in my end result of the painting. And sometimes it is a bit easy to get lost in the little details and to keep adding little details, so it's also important to sometimes take a bit of a step back of your painting, take a picture of it so you look at it smaller, or set it on the other side of the room and look at it from a meter or 2 meters, and look if it really needs something, if it's missing something. Or sometimes, in this case with really symmetrical paintings, it's important to look if right and left has the same amount of details, or that you went a bit overboard on one side and that you didn't match it on the other side. So be patient is also a really important thing, and to take a step back every now and then, it can also really benefit your painting. You can now see that we are slowly starting to move into the next stage of this painting. More and more little details come to the painting that make it unable to edit the colors and the layers below. And this is the stage where I can't change big things anymore. So when you enter this stage, you gotta know for sure that you are happy with that red that is laying there underneath, and that you are happy with the big shapes of the painting, but also with little details that need to go beneath the end details, like the edges of the wing and the body that you are gonna lay over some of the hairs of the wing and stuff like that. Also, the veins are also one of those little details in the end. I'm sorry that this bit is a bit shaky. That got worsened because I sped it up a tiny bit. But I was holding the camera in one hand and painting with the other. Also, something that I like to use personally is white. I nowadays have, next to my Ecoline white ink that I really love, I have some white watercolor paint. It was in my new set of my Van Gogh paints. Normally I am not a big fan of white in your watercolor paints because they are not really opaque, but they had one that they called opaque white, and that one is honoring its name because it's opaque, really opaque for watercolor, and I'm liking it in the paintings that I'm using. I used it a lot in my butterflies since I got the set, and it is almost just as good as the Ecoline ink, and it's even a bit less textured, that it's just like watercolor even though it's that opaque. For the veins of this butterfly I used a shade deeper of a red than I did for the wing itself. I used permanent red light for the wing and permanent red deep for the lines, and those red spots in the wings that I first used permanent red deep for that too, but I ended up darkening that color a bit. I believe I used a tiny bit of sepia to darken that red even a bit more, to a bit more of a moody burgundy red almost. For this bit I was a bit hesitant to go paint it because this pattern was really fine, and the brush I'm using right now is the finest I have. Most of this butterfly I painted with this one, and this is the Van Gogh brush number 1. I also used number 4 in the beginning for the red and stuff, but mostly this number 1. I don't have a zero or a liner brush, and for this tiny details that was in the pattern on the upper wing, I could have used a liner brush or a zero, but I managed in the end, and I didn't look too closely to the reference in what kind of strokes there were. I just tried to imitate the texture, and that's also something I want to say. You don't have to exactly copy your reference photo. You have some artistic freedom, and in most cases you just want to copy the texture and the feel of the subject and not exactly every hair and every stroke that you see. As a last tip, I want to say use a good reference photo, and also don't be hesitant to trace the outline of your butterfly. It's extremely hard to get two wings to be exactly the same, and even I trace the outline of my butterflies onto my paper. That's not to say that I can't draw it without, but it takes a lot and a lot of time, and that is something you don't have when you are painting for a challenge. With that, we came to the end of this video. I hope you found it helpful and that you got some tips that you can use. I wanna thank you very much for watching my video, and I hope to see you next time. I also wanna thank my Patreons, Chris, Hans, Allison, and Perosu, for for supporting me over there, and by that supporting this channel. I hope to see you next time. Bye!